Welcome back to an episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. That is not Alan Saunders, but that's perfectly fine because that just means this is a Farabaugh Friday. Once again on the Afternoon Drive, Nick Farabaugh joining me. How we doing, pal?
We're doing well. We're doing well. First week of OTAs in the books. Eventful week. I was telling Alan this. I don't think I've had a more eventful first week of OTAs ever in the four times I've covered it. So there's a lot to talk about, like from multiple angles, right? New quarterbacks, new offense, a lot of new. That makes it exciting to actually go cover your OTAs instead of, it's the same few guys, and it's
Sure.
cool, but there's so much change this year. It's really crazy, actually.
And you've been doing obviously the practice reports after every practice with Alan, which is why, Nick, I wanted to make you feel at home. So I got something for you. I know the viewers of the practice reports have been a big fan of the shades that you've been wearing after each practice. So I figured I would throw some on for you and make you feel at home on the afternoon drive.
Yeah, yeah. It's home now, right? I just threw on the shades before the Wednesday one because the sun was beaming directly into my face and I legitimately could not see. And then it just became a thing apparently.
So
So
now people are calling you guys the Men in Black. Like it's kind of taken on a life of its own. So I don't know that it can stop now that it started.
I don't think it can. It's going to be funny when it's like December, 30 degrees out, and we're just going to be, having the shades on when there's nothing but there might be snow out. I don't know. It worked for the summer, but when when we're in like December, it's gonna be we might have to find something new. I don't know, maybe beanie season or something. I don't know.
Yeah, there we go. There you go. Nick, what I think is going to be interesting is Alan had a bunch of takeaways from every day, but that could very much differ from what your takeaways were. So we'll start there. Maybe some of these will cross over into some of the YouTube stuff that I want to get to and stuff. But what were your just general takeaways from the first week of OTAs? You just said to lead off here that it was one of the more eventful ones that you've covered.
Just change, man. Learning guys how they tick. It's that's like one of the takeaways. It feels different. The team does not have the same fabric it did. When I left Buffalo a few months ago, it feels different. I don't know where all the leaders are going to come from. Cam's not there, which I think changes that too a little bit. Like there's going to be new leaders stepping up all across the board. Russ is obviously going to be one of them. But you got new guys that are going to be leaders like Patrick Queen and you still have TJ and Minka, but there's new fabric to that leadership. So you kind of have to figure that out. I thought one of the more interesting takeaways I kind of took away from the locker room was I think there's an energy and an urgency to this team this year. Like there is a different energy to this team in terms of, there was that Art Rooney declare in January that they were tired of not winning playoff games. Like I can feel that there's an urgency for this team to try and win. They think they can win. Some of that is, I think, rooted in confidence. It feels like a confident team right now, even though they're, still meshing together. I do feel like this team kind of has come together throughout their first. They've been together for about a month now since the workout started. I think on like April 16th. So they've kind of gotten to feel each other out, know each other, and I feel like it's meshing well from a locker room perspective. So I think that was one thing. I know there's the questions about Russell Wilson and everything. I think so far it's going pretty well. Russ definitely commands the respect in the locker room. Obviously, everybody talks about Mike Tomlin. Another thing when I was in the locker room, these aren't even on the field. The Arthur Smith talk is kind of interesting. It's not like I know Arthur Smith is going to be a good OC because I have questions about the Arthur Smith fit and hire and
Yeah.
all of that. But the amount of detail he goes into is so much more than what Matt Canada did. I think that's something. I don't know if you remember Smitty, former tight end Jay Sternberger went on a podcast last year and talked
Yes.
specifically about kind of the lack of detail, the why. There's no questions about the why with Arthur Smith's offense, and they've installed. I'm not going to go into huge detail because I can't report every detail I see
Yeah.
without getting confirmed. But they have definitely installed more than Matt Canada did this year last time. Like they're running a more robust, wider playbook this early, so it's interesting to watch. Smith is a fiery dude. In press conferences, he kind of comes across, as more of a laid back football naturalist, but at practice, he's very, very fiery. So he commands respect in the room. He goes through the why and the detail of it all. I think there's excitement, especially from guys like Pat Fryermuth, that really like how things project there. And I think Pat Fryermuth was one of my big takeaways. He talked about how Arthur Smith has gotten production out of tight ends throughout his career, whether that's been Kyle Pitts, Jonnu Smith, Delaney Walker. And he's kind of moving around all the formation, tight,
Mhm.
inline, slot, out wide, up point on the stack. I mean, there's so many different ways that they have used him, and his route tree is going to be different this year. It's not just going to be, schemes. The choice routes that he had usually were, sitting down on the spot, an out route, maybe a seam route. But this year, he's going to be running digs, slants, in breakers, flag routes, all these different routes that he's kind of got in his repertoire are going to be unleashed now, and he hopes that can really kind of unlock a new level to his game. So I'm interested to see what he kind of brings to the table too. But that's kind of my locker room takeaways. I have a whole nother set of on-field takeaways, and I think my biggest one is that, you know, on the field during this time, you can only take so much away. They're shorts, they're basically
Sure.
there. There's no physicality. So,
Mhm.
I've had people ask me, how's Troy Fautanu doing? How's Peyton Wilson doing? And I'm like, you really can't say how
Sure.
those guys are doing. I do think what you could at least look a little bit at is DB versus wide receiver matchups.
Mm.
Um, and the wide receivers obviously have been a big position to watch just because of the trade speculation and the perceived hole that they have there. I don't really feel any different than I did. I didn't expect to, but still think they need another receiver here before the season kind of gets going.
Yeah.
Um, and I do think I have a more established hierarchy of the receivers that I kind of felt.
Mm.
I think it's very clearly to me the top three receivers on this team. And this isn't by reps or anything. It's just by quality of play that I saw through 3 days is
Mhm.
going to be George Pickens, Roman Wilson, and Calvin Austin. That's what I feel.
Okay. That's interesting. I mean, I guess the name that I would have not maybe expected to hear you say there ahead of Calvin Austin, but at least like just based off of everything else was Van Jefferson. That would be the one guy that I thought maybe you would have had um, up there, but you're just talking about just in terms of the quality of what you've seen so far through a few OTA practices.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Van and listen, they're like rotating a cast of guys through the first and second team
Sure.
right now. There's been
Mhm.
8 guys I think that have run first or second team reps. So like none of this is solidified. The only guy that has not run anything more than first team is GP. He's been the only guy, right? So all
Yeah.
these guys are getting more and more reps wherever up and down the depth chart. I just think Calvin Austin looks a little more polished this year as a route runner. He
Okay.
talked about the snap of his routes, kind of
Mhm.
throttling down, mixing up the speed of his routes. I think part of what caused Calvin Austin not to create separation last year was DBs would play 10 yards off him regardless because he's a really fast player. But they had no reason to respect what he would do underneath because he couldn't create separation. He would have kind of, she struggled to throttle down. He had sloppy footwork, and they could easily come down and just take that away. So they would play the deep ball all day. And so he really wasn't able to win deep. And so I really think that's kind of where Calvin Austin is making a leap. Now, do I think he's going to be,
Okay.
not saying this guy's going to be like a certified huge contributor, but I do think he has a chance to at least, have a better season than he did last year. I think he didn't even have 200 receiving yards. I could see him getting 300, 400 this year if things
Okay.
go right, especially with the big play. I think this offense is going to have a lot of big play elements to it. Specifically, off play action with Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. Both those guys are deep ball guys, really first in kind of how they work. So I really
Mhm.
think Calvin Austin has a chance to carve out a role here and be a guy that can have significant snaps. It's just is really going to come down to who they add, the consistency throughout the summer. But through the first 3 days, I am seeing some difference in Calvin Austin.
Yeah, I feel like at this point it's kind of gotten like lazy or regurgitated. But we had a conversation, man. way back, probably when they hired Arthur Smith, about maybe Calvin Austin being able to carve out like a Khalif Raymond type role in this offense if they're looking for that type of player. Do you still kind of view it as that, or are you talking like potentially even more of a role for him?
Nah, I think that's about right. 3 to
Okay.
4 deep targets per game. I listen, I think he's gonna be the wide receiver 4. Again, I expect them to add somebody. I will say, I didn't really hear anything of, like, wide receiver trade talk when I was down there at the facility, like,
Hmm.
that wasn't really anything on anyone's mind, but I also think I've talked about this many times, I don't think there's a market right now, so why would that be on anybody's mind? If you can't
Yeah.
physically make a move, why would anyone
Right.
talk about it?
Hey, we're coming up close on that 6-1 though.
Yeah, they are, but, I
We're coming
expect
up
that
close.
maybe next week, if we hear that,
Hmm.
or the week after that, to maybe pick up a little more, but there is nothing going on right now on the trade market for wide receivers, and I know that there, have been kinda some speculation just because guys like Ayuk and Sutton and Jawan Jennings and Darius Slayton, they're still in contract talks, a few of them haven't shown up to OTAs. Again, it's gonna take time. Even if you look at the post June 1 guys, you know, the DK Metcalfs, if you really wanna go there, it's gonna take time, right? So I think it's gonna come from one of the holdouts, the contract related guys. I don't think it's gonna come from a DK Metcalf or someone like that personally. So we'll kind of see how this evolves. I don't know. I think they're gonna make a move at some point, but
Hmm.
there's no buzz around it right now. The time's just gonna it's just gonna take a while. And again, I've said this many times. It could happen in the middle of training camp. It would not
Yeah,
surprise me if it
sure.
happens even that late.
We're talking about, trade targets. Is there still anybody out there on free agency that interests you at all that you feel like could come in and be a contributor? I mean, yeah, I got a lot of smoke on X talking about the Steelers reaching out to, having contact with Michael Thomas. A lot of people doing the whole, and you did this too. The source question mark, thinking I'm lying. Do you feel like Michael Thomas could be a contributor to the room?
Could it happen? Yes. I mean, is it a fix? Not really. Listen, Michael Thomas, is he probably better than the rest of the players they have? Probably, but he comes with his own questions. He's been injured a
Sure.
ton. The serious injuries he has had, especially to his ankle, have
Mm,
sapped some of his explosiveness and sapped some of his athleticism. Um, he could work. He's not like the ideal upgrade you would want. Like,
mhm.
you want a certifiable, really good 2 at least, right? And the guys that I listed before at least give you that. I'm not sure he does. Like, I prefer any of the 4 names I said earlier, Ayuk, Sutton, Jennings, or Slayton to Michael Thomas. So I could be. But I mean, what's the contract gonna cost? I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll kind of see where if that happens. Outside of him, I mean, dude, it's really a wasteland. I mean, everyone's off the board. Even guys like MVS, who personally would not
Mhm.
have gotten even me that excited, are off the board. So to me, this is a
Mecole Hardman,
no. I mean,
Byron Pringle.
yeah, man, it's not great,
Yeah.
right? Um,
Right.
it's not great. So really, I imagine it's going to come via the trade market at this point, and we'll kind of see where it comes in at. I
Mhm.
still think they need a wide receiver. I think guys like Van Jefferson, Quez Watkins, Scotty Miller, others could be a nice kind of round to the depth chart on the end of the depth.
Mhm.
I don't want them being wide receiver too. I just don't think they have that answer there. I do think
Yeah.
one positive thing is that Roman Wilson's having a really good start. Um, you know, he's a guy that's come on hot. His role right now, Joey Porter Jr. basically described it as the same thing he does at Michigan, and he's just running a ton of over routes and coming in on motions, things like that. If you watch Michigan tape, you know how Roman Wilson was used very similarly to how he's been used so far. So we'll kind of see where he goes, but I think it's been a good start to his kind of launch pad to playing time. I think
Mhm.
he is starting to really kind of separate himself. Like, I mean, listen, Joey Porter Jr. was asked out of the other receivers of the GP who stuck out, and Roman was like instantaneously answered. So I think he's a guy that's catching some heads. I will say he's also catching some heat from coaches just because he's a rookie and they're
Mhm.
coaching him up on little details and everything. And if you watch Derek's stuff, you know the little details have always been kind of where Roman Wilson just needs to kind of tighten it up, and then he can maybe really become a really good NFL receiver.
Yeah.
But right now, I think he's the clear two behind Pickens.
Yeah, hey, speaking of Derek stuff, I would be remiss if I didn't mention shortly before we started recording this, our guy, Derek Bell, one-on-one exclusive with Patrick Queen, new Steelers linebacker. Awesome stuff over there, chopping up, talking ball. So be sure to go check that out on Derek's channel. I'll even throw the link in this episode for you guys to go check that out once you're done watching this here. But you mentioned a good point there about the coaching, and that's actually where a lot of the YouTube questions come in here. So we can kind of dive into that. I know you briefly talked about the Arthur Smith stuff, but I want to be able to answer Mike's question here. And I'll be honest, I don't know if this is Mike's ink, like Mike is like really into tattoos and it's ink, or if his name is Mike Sink. But either way, Mike, I'm very curious on the overall difference in player practice vibe and structure compared from last year with Matt Canada run offense to this year with Arthur Smith and all the new offensive coaches, new drills, more coaching, etc. What do you got for me?
So here's the first thing. Arthur Smith is more detailed, as I mentioned earlier. The
Mm-hmm.
instruction that they go through in a drill or an install period is much more in depth. Like the install periods are just longer too. Like it's like Canada's might have been 10, like Arthur Smith's are like 20. Like they're just
Mm-hmm.
longer install periods. I think they do more dynamic movement. And what I mean by that is I see more routes being run. I see more players being put into positions to see what they can do where. Like for example, with Canada, if a guy was drafted to be a Z, he was only practicing to be a Z. What if he could play X or what if he could play slot? Like they're going to try and
Mm-hmm.
unlock like
Okay.
with Roman Wilson for example.
Yeah.
Might he, in a game right now might he only play slot? Sure. Are they going to try to teach him press and put him on the line? Yup. They're going to see what he can do. Like they're going to see what the capabilities of these guys are. I'll also say I have never seen more play action ran in a practice than I
Yeah.
have. So that's legitimately coming. Play action is actually going to be a thing. Again, all this does not mean Arthur Smith's going to be a good offense coordinator. Just because he runs like inside out offenses, condensed sets, motion, the snap, it's cool stuff, right? It's stuff that the Kyle Shanahan's, the Sean McVays, everyone that is a top OC right now uses. Just because you do that, though, doesn't mean you're going to have a good offense. But
Yeah.
he is different in the fact that he's more detailed. They do run stuff much more akin to the modern day NFL, which I think is noticeable. And I think he does a good job of kind of figuring out his players' capabilities, figuring out the weak points, and really peppering in different drills that they do. A lot of the new too is probably related to, for example, like Arthur Smith does not dictate what Zach Azzanni does in the wide receiver room on a day-to-day basis.
Mm.
What he does dictate is when they come together for like individual team periods. And what I mean by that is they don't like it's not like they're competing against one another. It's when quarterbacks are throwing to wide receivers, stuff like that. I think this week we saw like slants against press. We saw slot fades. We saw seam routes. And they'll like do different groupings too. Like they'll split the tight ends off. Like I remember talking with Pat after Wednesday, and the wide receivers were going outside, inside, all over the field, out of bunch sets, and Pat was following the receivers around while the other tight ends were doing whatever the other tight ends were doing. Like
Mm.
stuff like that is different. I think that, he has clear, concise roles for these players. So really, Smith is a very different style of teacher. He's a more detailed style. The players know why something is happening as well. and they kind of have this concise plan of what to do against this coverage, this look, yada yada yada. I think it just there's more why to it, and I think it does help them play a little faster. So that's kind of my preliminary takeaways from Arthur Smith. And then you watch the film and all the stuff that you see, it's there. The mid zone, wide zone, the condensed
Mhm.
formations, the play action, the dig routes, the over routes, the shot plays. It's all there. He's not surprising anybody, by running his bread and butter. We don't have any, like, I have not seen anything that has made me go, that's different. It
Mhm.
like, I don't think we're too early in that process. He's got to get the bread and butter
Right.
down.
Well, that's what I was just say too, is I almost feel like this should be something that's revisited as we get to training camp and stuff like that and have some of those practices under our belt. Because I like a question that I kind of want to parlay off of that, and we again, this is something probably to revisit, is are they going to still incorporate some of the run game stuff that the Steelers had from last year, like and install that stuff into Arthur's offense? Because yes, it was a run heavy offense, but they did it in very different ways, what the Steelers did last year as opposed to what Art did last year.
I mean, they don't run any run game at OTAs. Like,
Right.
you don't. You can't touch each other, basically. I mean, like I said with, like, how's Spallettano doing? Bro, he can't even, like, punch Alex Highsmith if he's coming off the edge, basically. I mean, they're basically
Yeah.
playing patty cake. So,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, someone was asking about, Nick Herbig yesterday, to Allen, and he was like, I mean, y like, with pass rushers, you can't really get a good feel as to how they've
yeah,
looked yet. So,
same thing with tackles.
yeah.
I will say, like, the one time I can tell when they're doing run stuff is either by what the linemen work in their run block indie or when the quarterbacks and the running backs kind of meet up. They've done some read option stuff, but again, that's not new. Arthur Smith has always done quarterback run read option stuff. Did that with Marcus Mariota, did some with Desmond Ritter. Like, it's nothing new. The mid zone, wide zone, not new. So we'll kind of see.
Mhm.
I'm interested to see as we evolve if we see more, gap stuff in there, uh,
Right.
and where it kind of takes it. But I think people are just more enthused because it's a more dense playbook. Like, it feels like there's more looks, there's more plays, there's more detail. They're not questioning why they're doing this against a certain look, a certain front. It makes sense to them. So I just think that's different. And again, clearly by how Arthur Smith's offenses have performed in Atlanta, it does not guarantee success. It does not guarantee
Sure.
success, but it seems like the competency from coordinator to player is at least there. So that's like the
Yeah.
biggest difference I can say right now. And again, the run game questions, can Arthur Smith adapt the scheme to what Russ does or what Fields does, et cetera, et cetera? Those are all very valid questions. But just, through 3 days, it's kind of what I noticed and what I've heard from players is it's a little different detail-wise. Like, they know what is going on a
Mhm.
given play against every single look they can get.
And, sticking with the coaching staff, this was Hayden's question here. How have the new coaches looked at OTAs? Do you think Azzanni's style will help Pickens' growth? I really want to focus on the second part of that because, Zach Azzanni, you kind of briefly touched on there with like Arthur Smith, obviously, as the offensive coordinator. Zach Azzanni is the wide receivers coach, first year as a wide receivers coach, has the track record that we've kind of touched on before, like a disciplinarian, hard coach. Have you felt that so far at OTAs? And what could his inclusion mean for a guy like George Pickens going into year three?
Is a fiery dude. He put the receivers on the sleds the second day of OTAs, so
Yeah.
certainly setting a tone.
Mhm.
He is like the perfect wide receivers coach to work with Arthur Smith. If you are talking about the wide receivers, the effort that he really
Mhm.
likes to see. Like, I remember on the first day of OTAs, and Derek pointed this out on X, uh, Pickens ran a slant route and kind of just caught it and jogged. But on the second day, caught it and Zani made him run through it, sprint, dig, all of that stuff. So he's forcing effort out of these guys. He's
I feel
forcing
like
them
even
to
on the video that that was posted on day one, you could hear Azani saying, finish it," like in the background
yeah.
to George.
And
Yeah.
then on the second one, he goes run through the ball, dig, 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 and George just takes off. So it's interesting, with Roman Wilson too. Multiple times I have seen Roman Wilson have to redo a rep, he'll go say fifth in line, screw it up, and Azzanni will force him to do it again at the back of the line. It's stuff that he's hard on these guys for sure.
Mhm.
Demands full effort. If you are going to give half effort, he is going to kill you. There's going to be problems. There's going to be problems. Like, I think there's one thing about this coaching staff, this offensive coaching staff, that's going to be a commonality is we can deal with weaknesses in your game. We can't deal with your effort being the weakness. I think that's
Mhm.
what it's going to be. You're going to have to try. You're going to have to give it your all. So yeah, I don't, Pickens is going to be an interesting example because we have seen examples of him just not caring on a play, right?
Mhm.
And whether that was due to him, not getting the ball, whatever. We have seen examples of it before, the block with Warren, et cetera, et cetera. Like, that's not going to be tolerated anymore. I think it's part of the reason, they traded Deontay Johnson. I do. Deontay has had those questions this year. And even though I think Deontay and George is a very good 1-2 wide receiver, Arthur Smith wasn't going to tolerate that. Like, I didn't think it was. I think people asked, like, what do you mean? Like, Deontay Johnson's not a scheme fit? Sure, he is. Sure, he is. If your offense can't take a guy that is great at running every route in the book, being an X, beating press, can work all over the field, and win with separation, it's a bad offense. Like, it wasn't that he wasn't a scheme fit. That he wasn't going to mesh with what Azzanni and Smith preached. One of them basically had to be traded or something, right? I think that's kind of where it came down to with that. And so Azzanni is a guy that's he's gonna demand that full effort. And listen, I keep saying this too, like with Smith, I have significant questions about Zach Azzanni's track record as an NFL wide receivers coach. I just
Sure.
do. Some of the lack of development under his guidance with Denver is very real. It's very real. His stint with the Jets was very short lived. So I think there's questions about it, but I think there's difference in the cultural fabric. This is part of what I was talking about too when I went into the locker room and like talked about the difference from what it is now from where it was when I left Buffalo. It feels different. I think part of that's the coaching. Azani definitely sets a tone in the room that you have to try. Like, again, he can work with technical deficiencies. He's not going to work with lack of effort.
Yeah, and that seems to be kind of the overwhelming takeaway, honestly, from this coaching staff. So, the last thing that I thought of as we were having that conversation there, and this is more of just like a opinion, I guess, on your part, and it's in hindsight because one of them isn't here anymore and one of them is. But do you think it was just like, say George was the one going into the last year of a last year of a contract, and Deontay had George Pickens contract status, just the third year of a rookie deal? Do you think it would have been the other way? Like, would they have traded George as opposed to Deontay if their contract statuses were flipped?
I could have seen them doing that. Yeah, I definitely could have. I think George is probably a better natural fit just because he's a big body, wins down the field. But I
Mhm.
do think that, again, it came down to contract status. The Steelers probably had decided they weren't going to pay him after this year and signed to another deal. And then it came on, Arthur Smith has this identity, this cultural identity, and both of them didn't mesh with it. So they'll keep one and try and coax it out with the other. So I think if it had been flipped, they probably would have done that. Yeah. I mean, listen, dude, you can't tell, like, Roman Wilson right now is going to be basically what Deontay would have been. Like, Deontay would have been this outside in receiver that would have run a lot of overs, would have run a ton of, kind of underneath stuff. The deep stuff still would have come. But if Deontay had been a guy, maybe even if Deontay like couldn't block well, but he tried, Arthur Smith would have been fine with it. Like, I don't
Mm.
think Calvin Austin's ever going to be a great blocker, but he tries. He's pesky. If Deontay had been, that type of guy, I think he would still be here. So, yeah. And if you had flipped it, I think it probably would have been the Same idea, because Deontay has a role in this offense, if he is here. There's no question about it, and they created a hole for themselves that they really still have not filled. So,
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's if they didn't have to trade Deontay Johnson, I don't think they would have. It would have been easier just to sign a corner in free agency, right? I mean, they could have done that. They traded for
Yeah.
Dante Jackson instead.
Mhm.
Like, so that really, I think that's what it came down to with that. It was a Smith cultural thing. It's setting the tone about what you're going to have to do with this offense. That's really what it comes down to. George Pickens, we'll kind of see how he responds to it. I'm interested in it. He basically has to be the leader in the room right now. I don't think there's
Mhm.
another leader in that room. Like, all due respect, Van Jefferson and Quez Watkins have been at it longer than he has, but he's the best player in that room, and the best player is the leader in that room. So he,
Yeah, I
it's
don't know. You can have like fringe roster guys taking on that leadership role. Like, who knows
right.
if both those guys are even going to make the team?
Right,
So,
if you trade, maybe if you trade for Ayuk or Sutton or whoever,
mhm.
that they take on the leadership role, but Georgia's gonna be looked to probably be the leader in that room. We'll see kinda how it is. I imagine, most of the leadership in that room right now is falling on Azzanni's shoulders, so
Mhm. And of course, we've talked about Pat being in those meetings and stuff like that. That'll be interesting to see if that carries over to those guys and how much of a role he's going to have in that regard. So, all right, Nick, anything else?
no, don't think so.
There we go. Great conversation. Good takeaways. A lot of good stuff from you guys as well. Thanks for the questions. Keep them coming. Comment on this video. We will get back at it Monday, I believe. Alan should be back. I don't know of anything otherwise. So hopefully that is the case. Nick, tell the people where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me on X at Farabaugh FB. Make sure to read the stuff over at SteelersNow.com. Like, comment, subscribe, turn on the notification bell here on the Steelers Now YouTube channel.
There we go. Do all that good stuff. Also, leave us a 5-star review and subscribe if you're listening somewhere else. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. You can find the Steelers Afternoon Drive there. You can find me everywhere, Zachary Smith, PGH. But until next time, everybody have a great weekend. Thanks for jumping in, taking another ride with us on the Steelers Afternoon Drive.